How long would it have taken before you'd have been...
Well, I think, as to quote the Taoiseach, which I read in the paper, we were all on the brink. It was very close. That's why
How
it was
close?
so. Well, I mean, it was a matter of days, I would have thought. That's why it was so important that government acted so decisively and so boldly. And, you know, it was a bailout of the banks in a sense, but I mean, it was a bailout for the Irish economy. The Irish taxpayer must be grateful, and we, the bankers, must be very grateful.
Well,
to the
the
government
first
for what
thing I
they
would
did.
say to you that you should be grateful, and
I'm
very
sorry,
few bankers came out to say thank you.
And I'm saying thank you unashamedly, because we owe our lives to the government and what they did. Absolutely.
Right. Now, when you said the taxpayer should be grateful, I would suggest to you the taxpayer is deeply ungrateful.
Well, sorry, can I just go through...
Because can I say to you that if you ran a referendum on Monday to say, will we underwrite all this money with our our hard-earned euros, I don't think the referendum would have carried.
Fair enough, Marian, and maybe you're right, certainly with all the publicity. But if I can just go through it in a very simple way, why they should be grateful. If the Irish banking system had collapsed, there would have been chaos here, and the real economy would have suffered, and that would have affected you, Marian, your kids, my kids, and all of our neighbours. So we would have been in uncharted territory, and anything could have happened. And it's very important. I mean, I know bankers are not, you know, the favourite people for the past number of years, but it's very important in any democracy that we have a good banking system that provides the lubricant for the real economy. If we didn't have a situation where if the Irish banking system had just exploded, then you don't know what would have happened. We could have actually been dominated by foreign banks. And the big difficulty there is that they tend to pull back to their place of birth when there's difficulties. And Ireland would then become the New Zealand of Europe. So that's why it was so important that the government acted.
Because it was suggested that there were cheap buys in the Irish banks.
Absolutely. But other banks didn't buy. Why? Because they were all having their own difficulties in their own countries. This is a systemic problem worldwide.
Let me go back. You said you spoke to Brian Lenihan. When were you talking to Brian Lenihan?
I would have spoken to Brian Lenihan about 10 days ago. I'm not exactly sure of the date.
And can you tell us something of the conversation?
No, I think that would be very inappropriate.
Were you explaining the difficulties you were in?
Well, I think I was explaining the difficulties, and he was explaining difficulties that they had, and there was lots of things being discussed by lots of people in different ways. And at that stage, you know, mature insights hadn't yet been garnered, and when I say mature, we weren't quite certain which way it was going to go, and they were looking at everything. But I suppose first of all, what we had to do is
did he ask you for your recommendations?
When we had to go through what we had to try to again get the difference between what was happening externally and get that across and remove the issue about the bad debts and the likelihood of, you know, reckless ending, all of that. We had to get that removed, which we eventually did, and he saw that very, very clearly. Sorry, you asked me, did
you make a suggestion to him on how it should be dealt with?
Well, I mean, what I was trying to do was explain the situation to him, okay? He has obviously got more facts and figures than I have, because I'm from Anglo Irish Bank. He's got it for a much, much wider group of banks. So therefore, I wouldn't be so arrogant as to tell him what I thought should be done.
Well, I mean, he might have asked you, since you're in the business, we
certainly exchanged ideas, but that's
and what was your blueprint for how it might be sorted out?
Well, my sense was this, that this was not caused by any one bank. It was not caused by any one issue with any one bank. This was caused by the global crisis, and we as banks were going to fall eventually if we didn't get money, and therefore the government were the only place we could turn to. And why shouldn't the government act? Because if we didn't turn to them and if they didn't act, we could end up with no banking sector being Irish controlled. And that could not be a good situation for all of us going forward. He saw that very clearly and very readily.
There's a certain irony, you might agree, that we have been preached at about how let the market sort it out and let the market dictate, and the market will find its own weaknesses and strength and the market should run it. And then when the marketeers get into difficulty, they go running to the government and the taxpayer.
Again, Marian, I'm just not making my points well enough clearly. When they're talking about let the market decide, that is, the market can decide the valuations of banks.
Yes.
They can do all of that, and they have decided the valuations of banks. The banks have dropped dramatically in Ireland since this time last year, over 70%. That's what the value is, and that's what the market says. However, we're not talking about the market sorting out this problem, because this was a liquidity problem, and there was nowhere else to turn to. And if Brian Lenihan and Brian Kahn had stood idly by to let the market sort it out, we would have had chaos, and we wouldn't be in the position which we are in today. Now, as regards the taxpayer, it is right that the banks should foot the cost of the guarantee.
How much?
What do you mean, how much?
How much should the banks
That's
pay?
going to be, well, I mean, I haven't spoken to the other banks, and we haven't spoken to the central bank yet, and that'll take place next week. And our chief executive,
Have you not spoken to the other banks?
Pardon? Have we not spoken to the other banks about the guarantee?
Yeah.
Listen, a lot of things happened during the week, and we were dealing with priorities. And the next priority will be actually dealing with the whole detail of what Mr. Lenihan is proposing in the detailed regulation. So, but let me put it this way, Marian. The banks will pay it, no question about it, and rightly so. And much more importantly, if there is any bank that defaults, that default will be borne by the banking sector in the first instance. So all of the banks are going to have to go before the taxpayer is called on. And what we're really saying here,
will you run that past me again? You're saying that if one bank falls,
and then what will happen is, just take it very simply, Marian. If a bank falls, that means that its liabilities are greater than its assets.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's going to be a shortfall for the depositors.
Yes.
Okay. So someone's going to have to pay them. The government has guaranteed them, so they'll be paid. And then the government will say, right, we've written a cheque for, I don't know, 200 million, 100 million, whatever the figure is. Who's going to pick that up? That's not going to be the taxpayer. That's going to be borne by the rest of the banks. And that's quite clear and fully accepted by the banks, and rightly so. Big deal by the banks, of course, is right. So there's going to be no issues on that. So what effectively the taxpayer has done is this. He's lent the government's, the sovereign name of Ireland to particularly outsiders that will feel that can lend to Irish banks with a sovereign risk.
Right.
And that is an incredible advantage given to Irish
clearly.
banks. Absolutely.
Clearly.
And we are incredibly grateful for it, because it really was, it was the most decisive leader. I believe, quite frankly, that the decision made last Monday is probably the most important decision made in this country from an economic point of view since the foundation of the state. And I've got great regard and great admiration for what was done in the face of, a dubious public. And I understand that as well.
Yeah, but now, I mean, just looking up stuff on Bloomberg, the cost to Ireland to go borrowing now has gone up because our risk rating has gone up.
Yep.
So we're going to pay for that.
Yeah, but sorry, that should be covered in the guarantee. That should be reflected in the price which the banks pay. We shouldn't be asking the taxpayer to pay more for ordinary government borrowing just because they're bailing us out. We need to actually come up with that.
Figure of 2 billion is mentioned in the paper today.
I'm not going to comment on any of that until we have discussions with the appropriate people, Marian, because it'd be wrong of me. I haven't read all the papers, although I did see that this morning.
You did see that. Yeah. I would have thought it was a snip at 2 billion.
Well, as I say, there's no cheque being written.
Do you think it's a snip at 2 billion?
Do I think it's a snip at 2 billion? Well, it'll depend on the total of the deposits being guguaranteed, whether the...
no, that's not what I asked you. Do you think
it's not quite what you asked me, Marian. Do I think it's a snip?
Do you think it's a snip?
I think that's a big figure. You see, what I think is this, Marian, but we've all got to be careful here, and we've all got to relax down here on this. A cure has been provided for the ills of the bank. Wouldn't it be terrible if that cure killed the banks as well? The intention was to ensure the banks were vibrant going forward. So they've got to balance their need to get repaid, I'm not saying repaid, but get paid, as against actually putting in too much. And that's a question that needs to be discussed.
I
between
can
the
hear
banks.
the horse trading going on.
Sorry, no, I'm not horse trading, Marian. I'm just saying that.
Hear it.
No, all I'm just saying is, look at Marian. This has been done not for the banks. It's been done for the economy, but the banks have been net gainers on this. So let me be absolutely clear on that, and I accept that point fully. But Marian, we've got to come in to do this way together. Really, what the Taoiseach said the other day is, now the banks have got money, they've got to lend. We've got to lend money in a proper way to re-energise our economy, to get it going again. Indeed, we have an obligation to do that. Clear obligation to actually change the way we've done things.
When will activities start?
I think activity will start fairly quickly again. I mean, because there was nearly paralysis over the last few months. So I think activity, when things calm down completely, when we get we get all of this in, and we've had all the discussions. And Marian, you know better than I do the wide range of discussions. There's a certain theme, the banks. My God, big fat cunt bankers.
Yeah.
We're now taking them all out. Understand that completely. Absolutely understand that.
You see,
but what we must understand is that it's not just bailing out the bankers, it's ensuring that our economy, your economy, my economy, our kids' economy, has a fair chance going forward.
Yeah. When they do get angry about fat cat bankers, to use your own term, there is a bewilderment, not to mention anger, when you see people getting enormous bonuses on foot of appalling delivery. Like, it seems there are decisions made to give pretty amazing bonuses, no matter how people have performed.
Right. Well, first of all, I can only talk about our bank. And I am very well aware that senior Irish bankers are paid enormous sums in relation to the balance of the community. In our bank, we pay by performance. There's effectively a contract written out and agreed by, if you like, independent directors within the bank that don't work in the bank, that work in different areas of the economy in Ireland, with the executives. And that is agreed, and if the performance is reached, they get it. For instance, David Drum's salary of last year's salary and bonus package, less than a third of that is basic salary. And if he doesn't actually contribute and actually achieve his performance criteria, he doesn't get it. And it's as simple and as straightforward as that.
But we were going down the tubes last week.
But sorry, hold on, we haven't paid anything this year. So I could just say to you, and I will say to you very clearly, that the boardrooms of Irish banks will have to take into account the views and wishes of the taxpayer, the new stakeholder in Irish banks. And I believe that that new view and that new paradigm will be reflected in the decisions that remuneration directors, i.e. the directors, independent directors, that actually decide salaries, to ensure that people are paid appropriately and not excessively.
Will there be dividends this year?
Will there be dividends this year? I can't say that to you in relation to Anglo Irish Bank, because that would be wrong and inappropriate. But let me put it this way, the world hasn't stopped. We were talking about a liquidity problem, we weren't talking about a profitable problem. And the banks will look at all of these. We've got a list to the detail of what's going to be in the detailed regulations next week. And we're going to look at that, and we're going to have to discuss this with the Central Bank and with the Department of Finance and reach a solution which is right, not just for the banks, but also for government and the taxpayer.
OK, a couple of callers in. For ordinary, decent people get in money troubles, the bully boy debt collectors are moved in. If the same occurs with the high rollers, what happens? The fat cats are rewarded. That was by text. Another caller says, Marian, why have thousands of foreign banks not been affected by the liquidity problems? Were our banks uniquely badly managed? We'll come back to that later. Peter hopes the banks will show as much compassion to householders who may be finding it hard to pay back their mortgages as the government showed to the banking community in bailing them out in their financial difficulties. Another one says, now that the banker has said thanks, can he go the whole hog and say sorry to the Irish people?
Well, Marian, it'd be very easy for me to answer, a call like that and say sorry. What I've got to say is this, is that the cause of our problems was global, not directed, nothing. So I can't say sorry with any type of sincerity and decency. But I do say a very genuine thank you, because that is right.
Okay. Two more callers just before I go to the break. Marian, the Irish nationwide fiasco is not just inappropriate, it's treachery. It's the helpless man on the road turning around and kicking the good Samaritan in the teeth. It is unbridled arrogance. And that came from Jerry. Another caller says, banks and bank executives, through their choices, decisions and behaviours, have lost my confidence. This is not about an abstract money system. It's about the personal and corporate values that shape the system and determine what happens. And on that note, we'll take a break.